Planets. The Sun. Function: the development of a coherent operational self-image. The focusing of one's willpower and capacity for positive action. The creation of ego. Dysfunction: selfishness, insensitivity, tyranny over the lives of others, vanity, pomposity, inflexibility, imperiousness. Key questions: who am I? What kinds of experiences help me strengthen and clarify my self-image? Where can I find and expand my personal power? What unconscious biases shape my view of the world? The sun's meaning? Simple. It means life. It is a truth so obvious that we can feel it. Everything orbits around it. Astrologically, the sun works the same way. It is the gravitational center of the human personality. It is the focal point of all the varied functions that coexist in each of us. Our sense of identity, our sense of being a distinct person with certain ways of feeling and seeing, of shaping a life. Focus, organization, those are the sun's tasks. Ego is the focal point of the mind, just as the sun is the focal point of the solar system. Our own assumptions always make perfect sense to us. We cannot understand why everyone else fails to see them. Sun in creating ego also creates blindness and insensitivity. We get trapped in our individuality, insulated from the overwhelming array of options life affords. But the sun is what enables us to act. Without it, we would turn to jelly. Consciousness itself cannot interact with the world. Its function is only to observe and react subjectively. Never could it positively seek a specific kind of experience or shield itself from another life. That is the domain of ego. It is the part of the psyche that makes choices. Without choice, nothing happens. But for choice to occur, ego must first coalesce. A personality with all its hungers, all its visions, must take form. A myth must be created, and to us it must be an utterly convincing one. That is the work of the sun. From some cosmic viewpoint, our solar identity might be a vanity, an absurd posturing. It might be a myth, but it is not totally groundless. That myth arises from deep within us. It has roots. If ego fails to emerge confidently and vigorously, then all is lost. We become nothing but a disorganized pattern of psychological fragments, devoid of unity, will, or purpose, a space case. The moon. Function: the development of the ability to feel or to respond emotionally. The development of subjectivity, impressionability, and sensitivity. The development of what we might call a soul. Dysfunction: emotional self-indulgence, timidity, laziness, wishy-washiness, overactive imagination, indecision, moodiness. Key questions: what kind of experiences are most essential to my happiness? When moodiness and irrationality overtake me, how are they expressed? What unconscious emotional needs motivate my behavior? The moon, queen of mysteries. We all know what meaning it has romantically. Astrologically, its significance is about the same. The moon symbolizes feelings. To understand the moon, we begin where we did with the sun, our eyes. Apart from its sheer luminosity, the most striking clue the moon offers is its variability, always changing, always passing through phases. Luna symbolizes the part of consciousness that reacts and responds, that is sensitive to its surroundings, melding into them rather than shaping them or resisting. It represents the mood of the psyche, the way life feels. It represents the impressionability, the irrational, emotional substratum of mind. Heart, that is a key word for the moon. Pure emotion. It leaves the rationality of the head to other planetary functions. Far more fluid than the sun, Luna fertilizes the imagination, filling awareness with imagery and fantasy. To fulfill its visibly more dynamic function, the sun must screen out a great deal of unconscious material, and must guard the ego, Not so the moon. It erupts out of the unconscious, reveling in the richness of the psyche, censoring nothing. And sometimes the intensity of the feelings it creates can be too much for us. We get overwhelmed, moody, depressed. Left alone, the moon would do no more than dream. Making choices means burning bridges behind us. The moon would rather live in the imagination, where all possibilities can be kept alive all the time simply by never choosing to live one out. Still, the moon is the soul of life. Without it, all experience would be mechanical, a pointless meshing of gears. It is the moon that gives happiness and fulfillment. Despair and ennui are its gifts too, for they are the other side of the same coin. The moon is love, it is fear, it is human warmth and human depravity. The sun may build pyramids and space shuttles, but it is the moon that puts the sparkle in our eyes when we behold them. To feel happy, we must enliven the moon. Like the sun, it must be fed. And the birth chart gives the formula. The sun and moon can never turn retrograde. The concept is irrelevant to our understanding of them. But from now on, we investigate planets that have the capacity to stop in their tracks and actually appear to reverse their motion through the heavens. A retrograde planet often leaves that aspect of an individual's personality tinged with shyness or backwardness. But that is only half the story. Such a planetary function often possesses extraordinary depth and sensitivity. Retrogradation, above all, leads to independence. A retrograde planet represents an aspect of a person's character that lacks confidence in itself. It feels awkward and insecure, unworthy, although those feelings may wear a cloak of bravado and defensiveness. When you see a retrograde Mercury or Neptune or any of the others, treat it as you would a foreigner. Remember that it feels out of place, afraid of doing something wrong. That planet is a gold mine of fresh ideas, but they are buried deeply. Unearthing them takes patience and diplomacy. The main effect is that the planet is quieted down. When a planet is about to turn retrograde or to resume its normal direct motion, we say it is stationary. Being stationary does not alter the core meaning of a planet any more than being retrograde does. It just turns up the volume on the influence. It often becomes a dominant feature in his character, and almost always a stubborn one. Mercury, intelligence, transmission of information, talking, teaching, writing, reception of information, listening, learning, reading, observing. Dysfunction, nervousness, rationalization, worry, flightiness, intellectualism, chattering, inconsistency, hyperactivity. Key questions. What are my intellectual and communicative strengths? What are my intellectual and communicative weaknesses? If retrograde, mind turned inward, free to think in independent, imaginative, innovative terms, possible difficulty in self-expression. Words do not form. No planet is closer to the sun than Mercury, and no planet moves with more alacrity, screaming along through space at 30 miles per second. It completes an orbit in only 88 days. Compared to Pluto's 248 years. That is over 1,000 times faster. Pure mercurial energy is primal. The disorganized, free associative play of imagery in the mind, the response of consciousness to the stimulation of the senses. Words come later. They are a cultural artifact, only a way of imposing order on the confusion of our perceptions. Language is only Mercury's playground. Still, a strong mercurial influence usually indicates a talker. It always indicates a thinker. Speed is both Mercury's strength and its main liability. It absorbs impressions faster than any other planet, and it may process those impressions as clearly and unjudgmentally as a mirror. But those perceptions may also pass through the mind undigested, like a book collection belonging to an illiterate medieval baron. They may accumulate on the mental shelves like so many colorful, meaningless objects. This planet can rev up to a red line pitch and still not have much to show for it. Just a lot of words, a lot of pithy one-liners. It can turn a person into a trivia addict. Another Mercury risk, our thinking and perceiving functions can easily be warped by the fears and biases built into our own egos. Astronomy itself warns us of that Mercury pitfall. How? Visually, Mercury is tied to the sun. Mercury's tiny orbit is so much closer to the sun than ours that they can never be separated by more than 28 degrees. Mind orbits ego just as Mercury orbits the sun. Without care and humility, we may see only what we want to see. We may gather our perceptions selectively, always in an effort to support the model of reality with which our ego is most comfortable. That kind of rationalization and defensiveness is another of Mercury's traps. This planet can prove anything with the facts, and even if it can't, it can still talk so fast and furiously that we miss the holes in the argument. And the only behavior belying Mercury's certainty then is his nervousness. It can twitch like no other planet. Venus function the restoration of equilibrium to the shattered sensitivity, the stabilization of a network of supportive emotional bonds, the development of the capacity to make an aesthetic response. Dysfunction, indolence, manipulation, vanity, spinelessness, chronic abandonment to sensuality. Key questions. How can I calm down? What do I need in a partner? What can I bring to a relationship? If retrograde, may produce shyness or social backwardness. Feeling of goofiness around potential romantic partners. Doubts and insecurities about worth as a partner. Creative mind can be free and inventive. Venus. This is the goddess of beauty, balance, harmony, equilibrium. These are the keys to the Venusian vibration. She may lead us to create harmony between colors, shapes, and sounds, or to respond to a harmony that is already there. Venus gives birth to our aesthetic perceptions. It is she who puts the tear in our eye as we watch the sunset over that snowy field. Saying that Venus gives artistic inclinations is not enough. That is still fortune-telling. It is far more useful to suggest that people born under her influence must actively develop their creative abilities. The more they accept an image of themselves as artists, the more they feel in harmony with themselves and their world. Venus is more than the cosmic artist. She can also harmonize all the warring factions that exist within the individual psyche. Inner serenity is her gift. In the old traditions, she is the goddess of peace. Peace of mind as much as any truce between nations. Her position on the birth chart always suggests a kind of experiential input that can calm us down. She is heaven's answer to Valium. Venus is the closest planet to Earth. So Venus is physically close to us. She gives the appearance of empathizing with us, and she is perhaps the most lovely planet in the sky. Could she be anything but the symbol of our ability to form relationships? Could she be anything but the goddess of love? Relationships, we are all born feeling like half of something. Much of life is spent looking for the other half, or coping with it once it is found. For virtually all of us, relationships are pivotal life issues. We cannot make much progress learning about love without some input from outside ourselves. We must have partners. Venus knows that, so she advertises for us. Often she grants us physical beauty, advertising the fact that we are doing relationship work. Or if she does not grant us beauty in the movie star sense, then she gives us a kind of irresistible animal grace, and she offers attractiveness to the personality as well. Poise, courtesy, elegance of speech and motion. A Venusian is never pushy. Instead, he or she just washes over us like the tide. Before we know it, we are overwhelmed. Like Mercury, Venus is an inner planet, closer to the center of the system than Earth. That means that from our viewpoint, she too never drifts very far from the sun. The maximum separation possible between them is 48 degrees. And again, like Mercury, that binds her to ego, she can descend into vanity and self-possession, turning human love into a series of soap opera vignettes. Her grace can decay into slickness, her attractiveness into manipulation. She can be the playboy or the femme fatale, collecting scalps. She can become filled with lassitude and passive, sybaritic sensuality. At her worst, we can imagine Venus as a faded movie queen, lying back on her divan surrounded by yellowed old publicity shots, fat and vainglorious, eating chocolates. We are all born hungry, although the cure for the craving is not easily known, let alone found. Sating that appetite, even if only temporarily, is the Venusian art. Her methods are diverse, but her goal is always the same: to help us find a moment's peace. It may come in the arms of a lover, or in the adagio of a string quartet, or in a transcendent flash on the peak of a lofty mountain. Wherever it lies, Venus will guide us there only if we listen. We can heed her advice, or we can ignore it. The choice, as always, is our own. Mars, the development of will, the expansion of courage, assertiveness, training, dysfunction. Touchiness, rage, selfishness, insensitivity, cruelty, sadism, bombast, irritability, a chip on the shoulder. Key questions: what battles must I face? Where must I be more assertive if I am not to suffer pointless conflict and strife? How can I sharpen my will? How do I express my aggressiveness? If retrograde, tremendous staying power. Hesitant to assert oneself or make demands. Passive demeanor, anger controlled but internalized. Mars is the first planet beyond Earth's orbit. Mercury and Venus are closer to the center. In a sense, we spin around them. Visually, that binds them to the sun. They can never appear very far from it. Not so with the red planet. It can go where it pleases, independent of any other influence. That simple astronomical observation tells us a lot about Mars. It is the planet of freedom, of independence, of self-determination. The ancients knew Mars as the god of war, and they feared him. Arrogant and touchy, when he moved, they trembled. The traditional astrologer's view of Mars harks back to the days when Chaldean priests would scramble to sacrifice a lamb whenever the red planet twitched. An utterly malefic influence in their eyes, they connected strictly with unpleasantness, conflict, discord, hostility, terror. Those realities are Martian. No argument there. But to put them first is to miss the point. Above all else, Mars symbolizes the power of the human will. This is the planet that gives us the steam to do what we please, to shape our own lives, and to crush anything that stands in our way. Clearly, that is our risky energy to play with. When Mars goes bad, there is no planet more horrible. It can be unspeakably cruel, unpardonably selfish, insensitive beyond comprehension. If there is a killer instinct, this planet is its symbol. This is the planet of enthusiasm. It is the planet that puts the gleam in old men's eyes and the spice in the spirits of old women. Killer instinct sometimes. Survival instinct, the will to live, certainly. Mars cannot abide a coward. The surest way to turn the planet sour is to let fear make our decisions for us. Mars needs adventure. He needs stress. He needs the opportunity to go to his limits. A fierce, uncultured warrior, he is a good friend to have nearby when the thug stops us under a streetlight and asks for $1. How do we ensure that Mars will be the survivor instead of the killer? By feeding him what he wants. And the recipe is there for us to read in the birth chart. If one knows in one's bones that one must go on an adventure, but fail to act on the feeling, then one's Mars has no healthy outlet. It is cornered. We see the killer. She becomes increasingly irritable, touchy, argumentative, competitive over trifles. And of course, the people around her do not put up with that for long. They get angry themselves. She gets back exactly the same juice she is putting out. In other words, she gets her stress anyway, but not the kind she needs or wants. She would have been better off facing those polar bears. Face the bears, that is everything anyone needs to know about Mars. Jupiter function, the maintenance of faith, the development of vitality and confidence, the lifting of spirits. Dysfunction, overextension, over-optimism, pomposity, pretense, denial of negative realities. Key questions. What kinds of experience will help me feel more faith in myself and in life? Where might I be taking too much for granted? If retrograde, deeply rooted inner faith may produce a very serious exterior, may inhibit emotional openness. Jupiter is like a celestial good king, expansive, generous, cheerful. He is considered the most fortunate of planets by traditional astrologers. One word captures the essence of Jupiter, faith. Above all else, this is the planet of faith. Not faith in the sense of I believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Not anything so formal, but rather something much more primal. A faith in life. An unshakable certainty that life is worth living. When Jupiter plays a major role in a man or woman's psychic structure, we typically see a high-spirited person, an individual who moves with the natural elegance of a true aristocrat. There is magnanimity, expansiveness, a contempt for pettiness and pickiness. Always there is an indefinable element about the Jupiter person, something bigger than life. We are in the presence of a star. Unfortunately, the person may know that. Jupiter is the planet of pretense and pomposity. He could be nothing but a glamorous shell, puffed up with illusions of his own glory. Demanding and autocratic, he may hold sway over a court of ghosts. And when the ghosts don't play along, he may sulk like an insulted child. He will not sulk for long. Jupiter's spirits are resilient. He always bounces back. The cosmic clown, his faith in life is inexhaustible. Nothing can break him. Defeat is just not in his vocabulary, but defeat is in the vocabulary of life. For all of us, there will be sooner or later a mountain too tall, a disease too overwhelming, a relationship too impossible. These are the demons against which Jupiter cannot defend himself. He cannot gracefully retreat. This is not out of some kind of half-suicidal bravado. That state of mind is more akin to Mars. It is simply that Jupiter cannot imagine losing. The blindfolded fool blissfully stepping over the edge of the precipice, that is a classic Jupiter image. Wherever this planet lies on the birth chart, we find an area of life in which we are undeniably lucky, and one in which we must guard against taking our luck for granted. Over-optimism, overextension, and unrealistic expectations are the pitfalls of every monarch, and Jupiter may do a swan dive right into them. Kings and fools, such a thin line separates the two, and Jupiter balances between them, uncertain as a tossed coin. Saturn function, the development of self-discipline, the development of self-respect, the development of faith in one's destiny, making peace with solitude. Dysfunction, depression, melancholy, cynicism, coldness, unresponsiveness, time-serving, drudgery, lack of imagination, suppression of emotion, materialism. Key questions. In what arena of life must I learn to act alone? Where will a lack of self-discipline lead most quickly to sorrow? Where will my ability to dream and have faith be most severely tested? If retrograde, deeply rooted self-sufficiency may indicate a loner, enormous reserves of inner strength, emotional self-discipline, may have a hard time saying no. Saturn, the old astrologers sometimes called it Satan, the greater malefic. Even now the ringed planet is often viewed as the cosmic Frankenstein. It is associated with depression and melancholia, with defeat, with loneliness and frustration. All that is true. It is an accurate description of the way Saturn manifests if we displease him, but that is not his purpose. No planet is just there to hurt us. Saturn teaches one virtue above all others, self-discipline. That is the key to understanding the symbol. Like Mars, the other so-called malefic, Saturn seeks to focus the will, to teach us that most elusive of arts, how to do exactly what we please, how to make our intentions dominant over our fears, our laziness, our emotions. Jupiter is the planet of faith, but in a sense, it is Saturn that truly deserves that title. Jupiter gives us the feeling of faith, but often by supporting us with 1,000 crutches. Sure, I've got faith. Life is great. Saturn's approach to faith is not like that. He takes away the crutches. He shows us darkness, impossibilities, certain defeat. Then he asks, do you still have faith? Again, this faith has nothing to do with religion. It is faith in life, in oneself, in our dreams and visions, in our ideals. It is faith in the idea that we have a destiny, and only if those visions stand alone, unassisted. In the face of absolute impossibility, can we say that we truly have faith. Saturn is often symbolized by the hermit, which is a very appropriate image. This is the planet of solitude. Wherever it lies on the birth chart, we find an area of life in which we must act alone, an area where self-sufficiency is everything, an area in which we can count on no one but ourselves. Even our rewards must be supplied by us alone. So the lesson that Saturn confers is about doing a flawless job of being oneself, having perfect solitude, performing for an audience of oneself. One might love, but one would never really need anyone else's approval ever again. Failure to learn this lesson Saturn has woven into the birth chart, and we drift. We lose track of ourselves. Life becomes empty, meaningless. We descend into cynicism and despair. Absorb the lesson, and we still may not be dancing in the streets. This is not Saturn's way, but we gain the deep satisfaction that only the ringed planet can offer us. The satisfaction that arises from self-knowledge and self-respect. Without them, there may still be joy, but the joy is like papers in the wind, rootless. For thousands of years, astrology had been a closed system. That neat, tight system crumbled the instant Herschel announced his discovery. Suddenly there were 8 planets. If there were 8, why couldn't there be more? When the dust settled, astrology appeared to be dead. The age of science had begun. What could lie beyond the function represented by Saturn? That is to say, what could lie beyond the final self-actualized form of the personality? Or more simply, what could lie beyond death? Structures within personality are the domain of the visible planets. They map that territory flawlessly. With the new ones, we shatter the borders of nature, of ego, and of normalcy. We travel beyond personality. Their meaning? We do have one hint. We cannot see them. That observation is symbolic. It is the key. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto represent only possibilities. Unlike the classical planets, no positive manifestation of their functions can ever be triggered automatically. Uranus, function, the development of individuality, development of the capacity to question authority, the transcendence of cultural and social programming. Dysfunction, contrariness, stubbornness, inflexibility, touchiness, quirkishness, unreliability, irresponsibility, selfishness, insensitivity to others' feelings, inability to learn from others, eccentricity for its own sake. Key questions. In what department of life must I be most willing to function without social approval? Where must I learn to break the rules and follow my own path? Where will I consistently receive the most misleading advice? Which authorities am I destined to challenge and offend? If retrograde, individuality may be dissipated in fantasy life, whose outward behavior remains safe and non-controversial. May symbolize genius, not in the sense of high intelligence, so much as in the mind's freedom from culturally dictated obvious truths, quote-unquote. Hierarchies, authorities, rules, and regulations. These are the basis of every civilization. Without them, we would still be a pack of Neanderthals throwing stones at one another. But something inside every one of us hates those constraints. Something within us cannot bear to be told what to do. Something in us always identifies with the outlaw, with the rebel, with the rule breaker. The astrological label for that untamable quality is Uranus. This is the planet of individuality, of freedom. Nothing is more delightful to it than the prospect of mutiny. It is independent, rebellious, headstrong, colorful. There is an astrological symbol of what physicists call the uncertainty principle. This is it. No planet is more unpredictable. Uranus does not spin in its orbit, it rolls. Its north is nearly perpendicular to our own. Even in space, the planet of individuality dances to its own tune. What is individuality? We are born in America. We watch a few Clint Eastwood films, read a little Agatha Christie, a little pop psychology, and voila, personality is formed. It is an accretion, little more than an accident of birth. Individuality is something deeper, something wild and spontaneous, something inherent to the structure of the mind. It is the part of us that would have remained the same whether we were born in Brooklyn or Bechuanaland. It is the part of us that does not buy the myth of the tribe into which we happen to be born. It does not obey those rules. It respects no authority. It shows no reverence for ancestors, for priests, for presidents. It honors no pretense. When we manifest our individuality and develop it, we catch merry hell. Why? Because culture and individuality, society, and Uranus have been mortal enemies since God lit the quasars. Uranus challenges us to be free. To be true to ourselves, we must break the rules, and in breaking them we get into trouble. We are forced to develop and defend our individuality. The first step beyond the bounds of Saturn is not a spiritual step in the normal sense of the word. It is a step beyond conformity, beyond impersonality, beyond automatism. Personality must be perfected before it can be transcended. We must manifest outwardly what we are inwardly, with no regard for the applause or vilification we receive. We must accept in some small way the lonely burden of the revolutionary. Of the genius, we must leave the tribe. Few prospects are more terrifying. We may squawk about our jobs, our marriages, our boring lives, but to stand naked, stripped of these supports, before this awesome, brutal universe, and to still make conscious, coherent life choices, is the highest kind of courage. That spiritual transformation is the essence of the Uranian leap. A weak response to a Uranian configuration typically involves empty symbolic battles. Imagine a man with Uranian overtones in the part of his chart relating to career. In his heart, he wants to be a clam digger, but he is a lawyer. Coming from a family of lawyers, steeped in the claw your way to the top mythology. As much as he wants to heed the call of Uranus to toss his law degree out the window and buy a clam rake, he cannot muster the courage to do so. What happens? All that Uranian explosiveness gets safely invested in some quirk. He insists on his right to wear blue jeans in the office. He adamantly refuses to wear a necktie. And he defends those meaningless eccentricities with all the passion with which he could more profitably be defending his right to live his own life. This is the lash with which Uranus drives us. If we fail his tests, we feel like a bit part player in somebody else's movie, and the role we are asked to perform is that of a harmless but somewhat ridiculous marionette. Fascinating footnote with Uranus and the other invisibles, we discover them astronomically, about the same time that we discover them psychologically. Uranus was found in 1781, a time of upheaval in global consciousness. The American Revolution had just occurred. The French Revolution was just over the horizon, the scientific era. The Age of Enlightenment was beginning. All over the planet, the dignity of the individual and his right to question authority were thrust into the collective awareness. Neptune. Function. The decentralization of ego and self-imagery. The creation of a point of self-observation external to ego. The weakening of the barrier separating conscious from unconscious, ego from soul. Development of an awareness of what we may call God. Dysfunction, confusion, laziness, daydreaming, spaciness, escapism, drifting, drug and alcohol dependence, poor reality testing, glamorous delusions. Key questions. Where must I learn to de-emphasize logic and to function intuitively? Where is narrow self-interest most inappropriate and destructive to me? Where am I most vulnerable to mistaking wishes and fears for reality? If retrograde, the psychic sensitivity is distanced from outer reality. It is easily distorted by subjective factors, but relatively free of interference from the logical function. Someone who deludedly believes that he's Napoleon creates a mental picture of who he is, believes in it, and makes decisions based on it. So does the President of the United States. In both cases, an infinitely deep, unimaginably complex psyche identifies itself. It's a kind of paper doll. Identity is a three-dimensional mask, worn by a multi-dimensional being. The mask of the madman does not work nearly so well as the one worn by the sane person. It is out of kilter with the actual opportunities that surround him, but the parallels between the two processes are unmistakable. In both, the mind organizes itself around a myth. In both, the consciousness enters the theater of the world, and the price of admission is radical simplification. We must play a part. Something in each of us understands all this perfectly. Something in us never gets caught by the myth, never forgets all that this world is a theater. Something in us does not identify with identity. It stands apart. It just watches. Astrologers call that part of the mind Neptune. This is the planet of consciousness itself, not the contents of consciousness, not identity, not philosophy, not even wisdom. None of the furniture we carry around between our ears. Just consciousness, just the blank slate, nothing more. Traditional astrologers are divided about Neptune, seeing it as a planet of mystical inspiration and delusion, alcoholism. Both camps have a piece of the truth. Both refer to behaviors that arise when consciousness sheds the armor of ego. Sensitivity is heightened. A feeling of unity with the world awakens. We penetrate the fictions of status and identity. Our pretenses and worries, our ambitions and fears, our style, our self-importance all become hilariously funny. What can we do with that awareness? Some of us may just sit with it, shell-shocked into passivity. We become dreamers. All volition, all sense of direction melts away. We are left staring into space. We lose the capacity to take ourselves seriously. Ego refuses to coalesce, so we do nothing. And sooner or later, we seek ways to numb ourselves. Others respond more creatively. They intentionally explore this new territory, making forays beyond the normal boundaries of identity. They return full of insights, full of a sense of life's unity, full of suspicion, regarding the masks of separateness and individuality. And their message is always the same. All identities are mistaken. The issue is always the same. Neptune asks us to go beyond the universe of ego, hunger, and aggression, without sacrificing our ability to function as a personality. The first part is relatively simple. The second part is another story. Just as Neptune was found through its disturbing influence on Uranus, the experiences Neptune represents comes to our attention only through cracks in the ego and its armor. They come to us only through psychic disturbances. We have dreams. We have extrasensory experiences. We are inspired artistically or poetically. We are invaded by the delusions of schizophrenia. Neptunian mental events like these point indirectly to the existence of a larger framework of consciousness, just as perturbations in Uranus's orbit pointed indirectly to the existence of Neptune. They point to a vast dimension of mind, a dimension on which our awareness floats like a cork. In the decades immediately following Neptune's discovery, Neptunian values and preoccupations swept through humanity like a storm. The romantic movement in the arts, the rise of spiritualism, seances and mesmerism, the inception of mystical organizations like the Theosophical Society. Like never before, mystical Neptunian philosophies and compassionate idealism took hold of the popular mind. As a species, humanity was ready to discover Neptune. Once more, we see evidence that the discovery of a planet is more than a scientific curiosity. It is a deeply symbolic event. In the astrologer's universe, just as in Neptune's, no perception is unrelated to deeper events in the consciousness experiencing it. Pluto, the realization of one's destiny, the recognition of the absurdity of all narrow pursuit, the development of the capacity to discern truth, dysfunction, megalomania, grandiosity, violence, preaching, dogmatism, rigidity, dictatorial behavior, hunger for power, a sense of meaninglessness, or absurdity, ends justifies the means thinking. Key questions: where can I find enduring significance in my life? Where in myself might I find wisdom for which there is a great need in the world around me? Where must I guard against dogmatic, unscrupulous, or tyrannical behavior? If retrograde may produce a fear of personal disempowerment, may lead to a hesitation to speak the truths one sees, can give humility in the exercise of great powers. Adolf Hitler and Mahatma Gandhi's monoliths, symbols of good and evil. What do they have in common? As much as we may resist seeing it, those two are brothers in a far deeper sense than flesh alone. Both men shaped history. Each one touched the awareness of a generation, weaving into it his own dream, his own vision. Each man became a symbol of personal power, and each wielded that power in a way that the world will never forget. All of us dream. What is it that takes one person's dream and so magnifies it that it warps history? What drives a man or woman out of safety and anonymity to become a world shaper. Pluto holds the answer. To face Pluto is to face the elemental futility of life. The planet was discovered in 1930. It is no accident that we were discovering existentialism around the same time. Pluto ushers us into the theater of the absurd. It confronts us with galaxies and supernovas, with endless aeons of time, and it looks us squarely in the eye, pronouncing the final verdict. You are nothing. Your life is a joke. To live with that brutal truth, we must leap beyond the melodramas of personality. We must identify with something larger, more timeless. In that desperate flight from absurdity, there is only one path of escape. We must leave our stamp on eternity. We must change the world. Pluto is the planet of vast dreams, of visions, of conquest, and transformation. Mere survival is insufficient. Merely to live is nothing. We die, and in moments we are forgotten. Like Gandhi, like Hitler, we must carve our initials on the tree of history. Indian independence and nonviolent rebellion were not Gandhi's ideas alone. Hitler did not invent Nazism. If those myths did not have far deeper roots, those two men would have been mere theoreticians, just harmless academics. And when a theorist speaks, the earth does not shake. How did Pluto give these men the power of gods? By letting them voice the cry that was already there in the soul of their people. Pluto is a taproot penetrating the heart of a nation. It transmits into the individual psyche the brooding, seething force of humanity as a whole, all the dreams, all the nightmares, all the angels and demons of our race. But Pluto does more than fill our minds with phantasmagoria. It is an active planet. Unlike Neptune, it thrives on motion and change. Through it, we embody the visions and terrors of humanity. We represent them. We serve as a living symbol of some communal need or fear. And in so doing, power is invested in us by the culture as a whole. Our lives are given transpersonal meaning. We do not lose individuality, but we take on a second level of identity, not as a personality, but as a figurehead. This is the secret of the world shapers. The authority they wield is not their own. It is ours. They strike the chord, but we are the cathedral in which it echoes and resonates. Their power is not personal, it is collective. Hitler and Gandhi are catalysts. Nothing more. Their power is our power reflected back to us. History does not make room for many Hitlers or Gandhis. How does Pluto manifest in lives closer to our own? Not so differently, it still offers us a mission. It still challenges us to shape the world. We are still mocked in our self-importance, still tempted with the abuses of power. The fundamental issues are unchanged, whether we are on the cover of Newsweek or barely made it into our high school yearbook. Pluto represents a special wisdom in each of us, a precious gift. It must be found and cultivated, cajoled out of hiding. We may find ourselves expressing insights we did not know we had. Maybe they are connected with death and dying. Maybe they relate to what goes on in a marriage. Perhaps they can inspire friends who feel lost and directionless. The nature of the wisdom depends on the position of Pluto in the birth chart. But whatever its form, when we speak from our Pluto consciousness, people listen as if it were the voice in the burning bush. Few experiences feel better than being the crowd stopper. That is the horror of Pluto. Its hypnotic power can be corrupted, drafted into the service of a grossly lower master, our vanity. We can become bombastic and dictatorial. We can behave as if we were charged with divine orders to preach a message to the world, or to embody it. But the message has no divinity, it is just our own opinion. resting on the skeleton of our insecurities and our personal history. Frighteningly, once accelerated and intensified by Pluto's fierce posturing, it can still sway people. Adolf Hitler is the patron saint of that path. Gandhi rules the other course. His way represents a far purer response to Pluto, not because he was good while Hitler was bad. Those concepts have no significance to this icy planet. Gandhi's way is better only because it worked. He really did transcend himself. The freeing of India was just his vehicle. Nothing was left of his personal vanity, his private dreams. Nothing was left to be absurd. In becoming his mission, he left no opening for Pluto's existential mockery. He was no longer a target. Pluto, the chilly lord of emptiness, the pitiless trickster, stares blankly and indifferently down on Mahatma Gandhi. And like galaxies, like billion-year-old atoms, Gandhi stares back. In some cold, incomprehensible way, he and Pluto understand each other perfectly. And when Pluto turns his pretense withering gaze on Adolf Hitler, he does not see the 6 million, he does not see the awesome Wehrmacht. He sees only the ridiculous bride, the ranting and the strutting, the vain little puppet, trying and failing to flee his own desperate insignificance. And Pluto's laughter howls and swells down through the labyrinth of the ages. To Pluto, Hitler was no modern Lucifer, no devil. Nothing so glorious. To Pluto, he was a fool.